This is the Candid podcast. Welcome back to the podcast, and thanks for tuning in. Oh, we're going to get into some things on this podcast that I'm sure will ruffle more than a few feathers. But you should already know by now that ruffling feathers is kind of my jam, and it's something that I'll never shy away from as long as the situation calls for it. I will say that if you're one of those people that gets your drawers all in a bunch based off of what I'm going to say in this podcast, then you may need to take a long look in the mirror and ask yourself why that is. My goal here is not to attack Christianity as a religion or shame anyone at all, because no one is perfect, and ultimately everyone falls short sometimes. Even the most righteous and upstanding of Christians has backslidden or messed up at one point of their journey, myself included. So I'm not here to demonize or criticize people for falling short of their goals or for not being perfect, so to speak, 100% of the time, 365 days a year. As far as we all know, there was only one perfect person who walked this earth, and his name was Jesus Christ. Other than that, we're all just regular Joes and Joettes trying to do the absolute best we can to stay on track and live as clean of a life as possible, according to the rules spelled out in the old good book. Or are we? As I'm sure you can tell by the title of this podcast episode, I don't necessarily know if my last statement is even true for the so-called Christians anymore. Now let me be clear. I'm not talking about what seems to be the few Christians left out there who actually are trying to live by the standards and statutes outlined in ye old Bible. I'm referring to the people who have turned modern day Christianity into the complete mess that it is now. Gone are the days where being a Christian actually meant having to live by a certain set of rules and adhere to biblical principles and foundations. We're in a society where anyone can be a Christian just by throwing up prayer hands and invoking the name of God, even if they're living like complete demons in their private lives. And again, I'm not talking about people who may have temporarily fallen off the wagon, so to speak, spiritually. I'm talking about people who are living their lives under false pretenses and have essentially formed their own version of Christianity to live by, where the only rules these people follow are the rules they make up along the way. And that's just one of my issues with modern Christianity. We also have the growing prominence of megachurches that prioritize money over everything, pastors living overtly luxurious lifestyles, pastors hanging out with secular rappers and entertainers, pastors refusing to condemn certain lifestyles or communities within their churches in order to keep membership up, secular rappers and ghetto black people behaving as false prophets, corrupt politicians using Christianity to further their political agendas, and the list goes on and on and on. All of these things combined have created sort of a Christian gumbo where all kinds of random ingredients are just getting thrown into the pot and then trying to be passed off as a unified religion. No shots fired at gumbo, by the way. So all you people from Louisiana, don't come looking for me. Anyway, I've had enough of the complete joke of a religion most people have turned Christianity into. And it's about time that someone, that someone being me, speaks out about it. So let's get right into it. I'll begin with what I would say is the most common beef people have with Christianity in particular. And that's not just mega churches, but also their focus on wealth and worldly possessions and how that's trickled down to normal-sized churches as well. This topic does have quite a few sub-issues associated with it, so I'm going to break down and focus on them each individually. When it comes to the actual mega churches themselves, they've almost become the shining example or symbol of where Christianity has gotten off track. These churches are getting bigger and bigger by the day, often attracting thousands, if not tens of thousands of members every single Sunday. One of the downsides of this is that churches don't often feel like a close-knit family like how they used to back in the day. I can almost guarantee that unless you sit literally in the same exact spot every single Sunday, that it's going to be pretty rare that you're meeting and interacting with the same people every single week at a mega church, which can often make members feel like they're going to a new church every single week. And sure, that's something that can be fixed by a person simply choosing a smaller church. But with more people opting for mega churches and celebrity pastors, it makes it harder for smaller churches to be able to function properly and stay afloat because of declining membership. I remember attending multiple small churches that didn't even have air in the summertime, and that became an absolute nightmare when you're trying to get some of that good word while at the same time roasting and sweating like a cut pig. I don't care how many fans you have running. If it's 90 degrees outside and all the fans are doing is blowing around hot air, that ain't doing anybody one lick of good. Mega churches have also gotten to the point where it's almost like going to the theater or the opera instead of going to church. Pastors are often decked out to the nines in their extremely expensive suits and shoes. More on that later. There's cameras all around recording and documenting every part of service, including people passing out and running around in the crowd. It's just a lot going on. And again, I do realize that people dancing around and passing out in the crowd does happen very regularly at smaller churches. It just isn't on the same scale, nor does it have the same kind of production value that mega churches do. On top of that, pastors at mega churches are often treated literally like the President of the United States and are completely off limits to their members. As soon as service is over with, the pastor is swept away off stage to his chambers to recover from his powerful sermon. And rarely do any members get a chance to even shake the pastor's hand, let alone have a conversation with them. Now, I completely understand that it's obviously impossible for a pastor to meet and greet thousands or possibly tens of thousands of people after a service. But some of these mega church pastors literally, yes, literally, have a waiting list of up to 2+ years just for you to get some counseling or have a conversation with them. That's just insane to me. And that's not necessarily always because of the size of the church either. Mega church pastors love to travel to other places to spread the good word quite frequently. So you're also having to work around their robust travel schedules as well. And this touches on something that I kind of already brought up, which is how impersonal mega churches can be and how disconnected some members can feel from their spiritual leader. If you're going through some things and want to seek the counsel of someone at a megachurch, good luck getting a meeting with the pastor himself. Instead, you're going to have to settle for talking to some deacon or assistant deacon that you probably know even less about than the pastor himself. And that's pretty awkward and uncomfortable. If I'm going to church and paying my tithes every week like a good little Christian, then it would be nice for me to be able to talk to the actual head of the table if I have a pressing issue and not one of his assistants. The best analogy that I can give is let's say that you have a brain surgeon that you've been consulting with about a possible surgery. He's a specialist in his field, and he's considered one of the best surgeons around. Imagine when it comes time for your actual brain surgery that he tells you he's going to be out of the country for a few weeks and that his assistant will be performing your surgery instead. Wait, what? Look, man, I'm sure your assistant is the cat's meow plus a bag of chips. But when it comes to something this serious, I want the actual surgeon, not his assistant. And oftentimes matters of the spirit work the exact same way. But when you have to wait, sometimes up to 2 or more years, just to talk to the head honcho of a megachurch, you're faced with either getting some secondary help from some rando deacon or no help at all. And this is a major problem for some because Jesus was a man of the people who never turned anyone away. Yet most of these megachurch pastors only seem to have time for other megachurch pastors or people inside their tight inner circles. And that's very off-putting to me personally. Megachurch pastors seem to be the tone setters in the Christian community who all the other pastors try to emulate. I remember being at a smaller church with my ex-wife, whose pastor was trying to behave how all these megachurch pastors do. We tried on multiple occasions to speak to this pastor after service about possibly setting up counseling, but just couldn't seem to get a hold of him. Why, you ask? Because right after this pastor got done saying his very last praise the Lord, his security detail would grab him and whisk him away to his office, where he remained locked away until long after service had concluded. Anyone who tried to approach said office was turned away by his guards and told that the pastor was in his office resting and wasn't seeing people. Dude basically got to church, preached for a few hours, dropped the mic, and then retreated to his office compound, probably to count the tithes and offerings, which is something we'll get to next. And I realize this example proves that Hollywood pastoral behavior isn't just relegated to megachurch pastors. But as I said a minute ago, these normal pastors are looking at how the megachurch pastors behave and trying to play the old game of pastor see, pastor do, which certainly doesn't benefit the members of the church at all. And now I'll touch on the other megachurch point that I'm sure most of you out there thought of first, and that's their emphasis on wealth, specifically giving up yours to the pastor, success, and influence. Now, don't get me wrong. I know a lot of people have an issue with churches that preach the prosperity doctrine, but I actually don't. That doctrine is biblically based, and it teaches the principles behind tithes and offerings and how the man upstairs will bless you if you bless his church. The key phrase there being bless his church, not necessarily his pastor. And before everyone thinks that I'm the driver of the pastoral hate bandwagon, I do want to say yet another thing that a lot of other people may not agree with. And that is that I have absolutely zero issues with a pastor being paid a fair salary if it's his full-time job. How else are him and his family supposed to survive and keep a roof over their heads? And I also don't have an issue with a pastor having some nice things either. We all have some nice things, and pastors should be no different. Contrary to popular belief, Jesus was not dressed like some ragamuffin bum while he was traveling around and spreading the good word. He wore nice robes and definitely wasn't dressed like a poor man, which makes perfect sense. Most black people out there will know exactly what I mean when I refer to the hood preachers who used to stand on the corner or outside liquor stores schooling everyone about God, the white man, conspiracy theories, and everything else in between. These guys were always trying to tell you how to be successful while they were 50 years old, jobless, stood out on a street corner all day, still lived with their mothers, and used a bike as their primary form of transportation. What about that description would make you listen to anything that man had to say? Exactly. How can a man who has nothing tell you how to get something? Well, the same thing can be said for a pastor. How can he effectively preach the prosperity gospel and how God will take care of his children if the pastor's life doesn't reflect that too? No one would listen. With all that being said, the embarrassment of wealth and riches we're seeing flaunted by most pastors nowadays, even ones not at megachurches, is absolutely disgusting. Since there's no real salary range for pastors like they are for other fields, and there's no governing body to regulate and pay a pastor's salary, they're essentially free to spend the church's money however they so please. And that usually includes using a nice chunk of that money on themselves. We're seeing pastors nowadays preaching in high-end designer suits with expensive jewelry on, living in $1 million gated communities, driving $200,000 cars, flying all over the country, staying at expensive hotels, and taking very lavish vacations, all on the church members' dime. I think we all remember the outrage when Creflo Dollar, a megachurch millionaire pastor, asked his congregation to crowdfund or donate an insane $65 million because God told him he needed a new private jet to go and preach the word with. Apparently, even flying first class on a commercial airline is below what high-profile pastors deserve nowadays. Church and Christianity has taken the concept of you investing in yourself by following God's principles of sowing and reaping and turned it into nothing but a huge money grab. I distinctly remember a time when I was at a church and the pastor basically held everyone hostage one day before ending service. He had already called for the tithe, offering, and special church fund seed earlier in the service. But just before church ended, God suddenly put it on his heart to call for another special offering. Now, mind you, this was at a small church, but that mattered not. This pastor proceeded to call for 10, yes, 10, T-E-N, people to give $500 apiece for this special seed. Not $5, not $50, but $500 at a church full of members who looked like they were barely making it financially themselves. But who cares about you? This is about God. So the pastor proceeded to essentially hold us hostage and keep everyone at the service until all 10 people listened to their heart, walked up to the pulpit, and laid down a check for 500 big ones. It almost felt like extortion at one point as he called out disobedience, selfishness, missing your blessing, and anything else he could come up with to get these supposed 10 people to pony up the cash. Well, God must have lied to the old preacher man that day, because mercifully, after about 15 or 20 minutes of being held captive, he only walked away with a piddly $2,000 because only a whopping 4 people found it in their hearts to cough up the $500 vacation fund seed, special seed money he was looking for. Once I walked out of that church that day, that was the last straw, and I never stepped foot in that church again. What's really bad about money grabs like this and these millionaire mega church pastors as a whole, it's not only their complete lack of availability when you need them, but also their selfishness and overall greed in general. And I personally find that fact the most perplexing, seeing that it's completely opposite of how Jesus lived and preached, and it's contrary to what Christianity is supposed to be all about. Even though Jesus wasn't a poor ragamuffin bum, he gave 1,000,000 times more than what he received. Yet these mega church pastors don't really seem to agree with that part of the Bible. I'm sure that some of these mega churches do outreach and help communities to a degree, but how many times are these money-worshiping pastors reaching into their own pockets to help the people they claim to love so much? We can go back to the Creflo Dollar example I just gave. That man was looking to raise, and I'm going to use my Dr. Evil voice here, $65 million for a private jet for himself. Not for the people, but so that he could travel around the country freely and live the life of a baller pastor. Do you know how much good $65 million could do for the community? How many houses it could provide for struggling families? How many rehab centers it could provide for people struggling with addiction? Hell, even if the answer is just one facility, it's one more than the community had before. But nope, who needs a stupid rehab facility when pastor is struggling with flying on his older private jet? It sounds ridiculous, but this is real life. I vividly recall a time at the church with Mr. $500 seed I spoke of earlier, where he showed a picture of his pastor's backyard on the video screen during service and said, "Look at his backyard. He don't need to go to a park. He just needs to walk out his back door and he got a park waiting for him." When the congregation stayed pretty much silent, the pastor literally said, "Oh, don't hate. Let's clap it up for him." Why the hell would I be clapping for another man's possessions? What has that pastor done for me? You want me to celebrate his wealth while you call me a hater at the same time? How about this? How about you start taking some of the church funds and helping your members live a better life instead of subjecting them to viewing pictures of how well your $1 million mentor is doing? Money, 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 money. That seems to be what most of these Christian prosperity preachers are all about. But the money only flows one way. You have so many people in church that need help, and some are giving their last dime in hopes that God will bless them in return, while the preacher man blesses them for their contributions and then ignores them when they're in need. Pastors are driving 3 and 4 luxury cars while faithful church members are catching rides to service every Sunday, and it absolutely disgusts me. And I do understand that the pastor can't help everyone, or he would go broke himself. But I've been around enough of them to know that it's not about them refusing to help everyone. It's about them refusing to help anyone, especially substantially. Is that what Jesus taught? Is that the Christian way? It reminds me of the outrage people had when Maui was decimated by those terrible fires in 2023, and Dwayne Johnson and Oprah Winfrey were making commercials asking for donations to help the people affected. Meanwhile, Oprah has enough money to buy and fix the entire island herself. Yet despite her being worth a cool $3.5 billion with a B, she only donated $5 million to the cause. And while $5 million sounds like a lot to us, that equates to literally 0.166 6% of her worth. Not even 1%. And millionaire pastors often operate the same way. Going back to the church topic, what really makes me upset with some of these pastors is that they try to pass off their wealth, success, and worldly possessions as God blessing them for their faithfulness, and push the notion that if you just give more and stretch your faith, God will bless you just as much as he has them. And most times that's a complete lie. If everyone was meant to be rich, then no one would have employees. These pastors could be the help that some of these members desperately need, but instead of these guys sacrificing their lavish lifestyles and being more giving for the good of their flock, they're instead using Bible verses to get more money out of their congregations to fund their personal business ventures, houses, cars, personal trips, and so on. The core principles of Christianity, like giving, sharing, and being selfless, have been totally lost thanks to mega churches and millionaire pastors. And while there are still plenty of blind people that follow these guys and give excess amounts of money every week to these crooks, hoping for a miracle or a blessing to arrive, there are plenty more people such as myself that have smartened up and become disenfranchised with these mega church millionaire pastors because we see most of them for the snakes in the garden that they really are. And we're not even going to talk about some of the pastors out there, mega church millionaire or not, who refuse to go after certain communities or lifestyles because they don't want their brand to be affected or lose membership, which in turn would hurt their status and revenue, because we all know that the truth is worth way less than cold, hard cash. I could literally go on and on with this topic and cite even more personal examples and experiences, but let's move on. Another major reason why Christianity is such a joke these days is because people have twisted it up, reshaped it, and made it into a religion that has none of the guardrails and core principles that the Bible talks about. And as usual, we have rappers, athletes, and the African American community to thank for a large part of this. Essentially, faith has become a badge that you wear, rather than a lived ethic that people try to abide by every day. Instead, all of the weaklings out here have created a version of Christianity that fits the lifestyle they want to live, all while claiming they're followers of Christ in the process. Ask any of these foolish, secular rappers who are out in the world fornicating, using foul language in their lyrics, denigrating women, and glorifying drug use, violence, and even terminating a life. And most of them will tell you that they're Christians who love and believe in God. And the lemmings who follow them will battle you to the bitter end defending these clowns. I've literally seen interviews where some of these rappers will sit and tell you that they're just blessed to be in the position they are, and that they're just trying to live their lives the right way, all while rapping about and essentially promoting everything the Bible was against. It makes zero sense to me, but apparently I didn't get the memo where all the mess these guys rap about now was accepted as part of the Christian way. And I absolutely love it when the people who support these clowns try to pull a verse or story out of the Bible of someone eliminating someone else, like Cain did to Abel, for example, yet never seem to cite the consequences for that person's actions. Or even Moses eliminating an Egyptian and not being punished for it, but then fail to state that Moses did so because he saw said Egyptian taskmaster beating a Hebrew slave, and that he likely would not have been punished for that same act based on the self-defense or defense of others laws that we have today. Now, I'm not trying to get off into Bible school here with this point, but I'm sure most people can still get my drift. I see no way on God's green earth that if Jesus were alive today, that he'd be up on a stage at a Wheezy concert rapping along the lyrics with him. Yet that's exactly what tons of fake Christians out here dream of, while at the same time trying to call themselves children of God. I mentioned this point in a previous podcast as well, but according to most African Americans, even drug dealers, thieves, liars, and people who have taken lives apparently all go to heaven and were, quote, good people, even if they lost their lives during the act of doing something foolish and completely contrary to how the Bible says we should live. Lose your life in a shootout with the cops while you were in a stolen car? No problem. The pearly gates are awaiting your arrival because Uncle DeAndre, and by the way, that's spelled capital D, apostrophe, capital A, apostrophe, lowercase n, apostrophe, DRE, said you was a good person who had a big heart and you loved it, did all people, especially them children. You just made a few mistakes with some felony convictions and lost your life because you didn't want to surrender peacefully when you got caught during your latest felony. None of that matters because you were a Christian and Uncle DeAndre can't wait to see you up in heaven, thugging with the Lord. I've asked this question plenty times before. If people like this don't go to hell, then who does? Not so surprisingly, no one has been able to answer that for me, even though I keep asking. If you're a Christian, then you must believe in the concept of heaven and hell. If rappers glorifying and participating in nonsense and criminals all go to heaven, I'm asking the people way in the back, who goes to hell? Maybe one day someone will be able to conjure up some kind of BS answer for that, but so far, I've got nothing. What I do normally get in these situations is the old tried and true, only God can judge me, or judge not lest ye be judged. And I always find that so very comical. This conversation has nothing to do with me judging people. It has everything to do with people who are willfully smoking, drinking, sorry folks, fornicating, and a whole bunch of other mess while proclaiming those things to be okay as they trumpet themselves as Christians. See, there's a big difference between someone who may backslide and take a smoke or a swig of a drink, but still continue to try and beat those addictions and live a clean life, and someone who embraces those addictions and tries to pretend as if you can be a true Christian and still partake in those things on a regular basis. Point blank, you're making up your own religious doctrine to fit how you want to live your life, not how God says you should live your life. All of us struggle with something somewhat evil in our lives that we have trouble breaking away from, myself included. So none of us are perfect. But that doesn't mean that you could just make up your own set of rules around Christianity, live how you want to, and spread false gospel either. Sorry, not sorry to all you weak-minded folks out there, but that's just how it is. Christianity came with a set of rules, and those rules are spelled out in the Bible. So if you're not trying to actively live those rules every single day, even if you fall short, then creating your own version of Christianity and calling it good is not going to save you. Period. Here's a great analogy for you. I have never served in the military in my life. But let's say that I can complete a few Navy SEALs drills on my own at home, and I can hit within 1 inch of the bullseye of a target at 200 yards with an AR-15. Can I call myself a Navy SEAL or an Army sniper now? No. Well, why not? I passed some of the requirements on my own at home, so I'm good, right? Of course not, because that's not how it works. I need to go through and complete the officially documented steps, training, and service in order to call myself a Navy SEAL or an Army sniper. I don't get to cherry pick the easy steps I want to take while avoiding the difficult ones just because I want to say that I'm a Navy SEAL or an Army sniper. The same concept applies to Christianity. Too many people feel it's just as easy as saying they love God and then use that as a basis to build their own version of Christianity, which has watered down the religion and led to so many people being disenfranchised, confused, and angry over what modern day Christianity has become. The bottom line is that some people are trying to treat Christianity as if it's just a loose concept that you can mold and make comfortable for each individual's lifestyle, instead of you being convicted by your sins, turning your life around, and trying to live how the Bible says you should, not how you say you should. I'm going to move on from talking about people embracing their vices as part of their own personal Christian religion and touch on a different but very much related aspect of this point. And that's the fact that, in my opinion, a lot of Christians have become worse people than most non-Christians are. Now, obviously, I'm not making a blanket statement here and saying that all Christians are bad, but I'm telling you that from my own personal experience, I've been done wrong more in my life by Christian people than people who weren't. And this is especially true for people who are supposedly deep in the church. Some of the fakest, sneakiest, and most underhanded people I've met in my life proclaim themselves to be all about God. And they'll rebuke you in the name of Jesus at the drop of a hat just before they stick a nice big old knife in your back. A lot of modern day Christians suck as people. That's my experience. Period. I've often told a very good friend of mine how his mom, Miss Sandy, who I believe is in her late 70s, is a national treasure. She's what I consider a true Christian. Every time I went over my friend's house, who is white, by the way, it was like walking into the United Nations. All races were welcome and everyone was treated like family. You would get fed, and I'm not talking about just basic food. Their whole refrigerator was open to you and anything in it was fair game. She was the nicest, most humble Christian woman I think I've ever met in my life. She would give me a kiss on the cheek and tell me how good of a friend I was to my buddy and how she absolutely loved having me around. Was she perfect? Of course not, because no one is. But this woman truly tried to live and embody the spirit of what being a real Christian person is. And if I could take a mold of someone to use and reproduce an army of Christians, I'd use her, because they just don't make Christians like this woman anymore. They also don't make women like this woman anymore, but that's a whole nother subject. My old pastor used to say that church is like a hospital for the spiritually sick. Not everyone there is well. Some people are recovering nicely, but some others are still struggling. And I get that, but my personal experience has been that everyone seemed to be on life support, and they were about one more cough away from getting the plug pulled on them. As I said before, Pretty much everyone who has screwed me over in life or done me wrong has been a diehard Christian. And I'll point back to the black church as one of the main culprits for this. Since the African American community has such a high rate of fatherless children, there are a lot of black people, both men and women, who go to church and begin viewing and treating their pastor as their daddy, because that's essentially who he is to them. He's the only male figure in their lives that they've ever received any kind of advice or inkling of love from. And pastors also have some status behind them as well. So these members naturally want to get closer to him. So what often happens next? These members start developing a pattern of being sneaky, backbiting, and doing whatever's necessary to get in the good graces of the pastor and move up in status within the church so they can feel like a somebody and be closer to their daddy. I've seen it more times than I can count. And of course, now that these people see how well being sneaky, lying, and behaving like an overall crummy human being works in the church, they carry it over to their everyday lives and personal relationships as well. I'm being completely serious when I say that I literally told a member at a former church that I actually welcomed working the homeless mission as a break from being around church folks, because homeless people are as real as it gets. They're honest, and you know what you're getting from them. I am legit less scared of a homeless person than I am of most Christians based on my experience. And that's pretty sad. Again, I know no one is perfect, but as I said earlier, there's a difference between a backslidden mistake and a pattern of horrible behavior. Most of the people I've met at churches that are in positions of power, like a deacon, for example, aren't there because they really care about people and have a heart for God. They just want the title and status because it makes them look like a big shot at the church. They'll stab you in the back quicker than a member of the Sinaloa cartel. Most of the people out there, including pastors, Bible thumping, claiming Christianity, and praising God, are the messiest, most disingenuous people walking the earth and care about nothing but themselves. I've had Christians who were supposedly deep into church cuss me out, lie on me, spread rumors about me, and anything else you could probably think of. It's crazy. Is that how Jesus acted? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not out here expecting people to sacrifice themselves for my sake like Jesus did, but I'm also not looking to be sacrificed for someone else's pleasure or gain either. Unfortunately, this kind of behavior has only been made worse by politics. I've made it very clear that I'm a conservative man, but the Republican Party, which claims to be all about having Christian-based values, is repeatedly engaging in completely reprehensible behavior that gives the absolute opposite message of what real Christian-based values are supposed to look like. I mean, politicians, no matter the party, have always been corrupt, but in recent years, the supposedly Christian Republican Party in particular has not exactly been a shining example of how servants of God are supposed to carry themselves. So once you combine a healthy serving of prosperity gospel millionaire pastors preaching one gospel, but often living out a different one, with whack job politicians who are essentially doing the same thing, is it really a surprise that the average Joe Schmo would start following suit? Most people walking this earth aren't leaders, they're followers. So when they see people in positions of power who they idolize, twisting up the scriptures and creating a Christian lifestyle based on their own hand-picked rules and principles, it's only a matter of time before everyone starts behaving the same way. And that's one of the main reasons why, again, in my experience, most modern-day Christians are some of the worst people I've encountered in my time on this planet. I think I'll cut it right there, folks. As I said a few times already, there are so many more nuanced details and experiences I can give that this podcast could have legitimately gone on for a few hours. When all is said and done, I want to reiterate that this is not an attack on Christianity itself. It was an attack on what Christianity has become. If you go pick up a copy of the old good book and start reading it, you'll find that nothing has changed since Bibles first started being printed. What has changed, unfortunately, is our culture and how we go about practicing Christianity. Gone are the days of people accepting that sacrifice, giving, and being a light unto others is what being a child of God is all about. Instead, it's been replaced with a version of Christianity that's centered around people making up their own principles, values, and standards that fit what makes them comfortable, even if it's not right. I'm not here to convict anyone, nor am I claiming to be the model of perfection either. But what I'm not going to do is sit back and co-sign a lot of this buffoonery that is turning the whole concept of Christianity into a complete mockery. And to all the people out there who will inevitably say that I'm not their God, I have no say in their lives, and that only God knows the truth and sees your heart, my response to that is, you're right. So no matter how upset you get at me, or how much you try to deny the truth, even to yourself, one day when you bite the big one, you will be standing in front of God for judgment. So he is the only one that you ultimately have to convince to believe your lies. As always, if you're listening in on YouTube, I appreciate a like, a subscribe, or you leaving a comment. I'm continuing to try to bring you great content, and I hope that you enjoy the kind of podcast that I'm bringing to you. Thanks for listening in. I will catch you on the next one.